All right.
Hopefully yours works better than mine.
I apologize. I did try to close my previous meeting earlier. They were having too much fun, and the elevators are slow.
You probably want that.
Are you having dongle problems?
I am, although we'll see if it's actually me or if it's the projector cable. Oh, well, at least it's the same for you.
Oh, much better.
There you go. So we have a Jabber scribe already. Did you have a minute volunteer already lined up?
We do not have a minutes volunteer. Anyone raising their hand willing to take notes for us? Thank you.
If you could direct people to the front mic, it's easier for me to say their name.
So, and Michael will be our Jabber scribe, and he's asked if you could, he would prefer people come to the front mic because then it's easier for him to see your badge. I've been trying to multitask and,
Yeah.
You know, hand me one.
There.
Date 11, 13, 14. Oh, thanks. Yep. So, okay, I'm not seeing any more people coming in. Now I'm seeing people coming in. I believe this is the IPv6 operations working group, IPv6 Ops. These are my co-chairs, Fred Baker, Ron Bonica. Ron will be joining us in a little while. Unfortunately, Ron, as you know, was just added as a co-chair, and his other working group happens to be meeting at the same time. So he's we're very happy to have him. So standing in for co-chairs is our area director, Joel Yegley. Thank you, Joel.
No problem.
Some administrivia. Minutes, your name here. So that was Eric Vinke. Thank you. Jabber, Michael Abramson. Thank you. And I do have the links up here, and I sent them to the mailing list because some links to meeting materials were not working as well as others. So I hope that everybody who's looking for meeting materials has found them. I will also say that if you think you are presenting today, let me come back to that in a sec. I do not have slides from all of these people, so that's going to make it a little difficult to present your slides. We have a note well. I like to spend, since we're meeting on Monday, I like to spend an extra minute talking about what's in the note well. This says any contribution that you make at the microphone on a mailing list is actually a public contribution. You can't go back and later and say, no, that wasn't meant for IETF consumption. There's obviously a lot more detail here, but I do want you to make sure that you know that because that applies to everything that you do in regards to IETF work. And you can read it in more detail. And of course, when you registered, you also had to read it and agree that you had read it. So we have an agenda. We do have an agenda bash already. Time permitting, Victor Coursing wants to discuss some potential additional work. He doesn't have a draft to discuss, but he did send slides. Any other agenda bashing? Anybody want any changes? Victor, are you in the room to talk about? Yes, there you are. No, to talk about design principles, design choices. Philip's going to talk about design choices. Philip, are you in the room to talk about design choices?
I guess so, sure.
And of course, I'm going to ask that you stay in the pink box so that our remote participants can see you, and you're welcome to, you're certainly allowed to do that, yes.
Do I have an order or do I just say next slide?
You're going to have to say next slide because I haven't figured out how to plug it in.
Okay, that's last very well. Good. Is there, well, I'll just do this since this thing doesn't need to be working.
Yes.
Okay. Hi, I'm Philip Matthews, and this is joint work with Victor, who's over there, who's going to present shortly after me on a related topic. So this says actually it's the -11 version of this document. We actually published the -12 version this morning with one change, which I'll talk about in a minute, and a few little things. So next slide. So here is the agenda. I'm only planning to talk for maybe 10 minutes max so that we have time for discussion, and otherwise we can save things for other things. So I'm going to go sort of one slide quickly, remind you what this document is. This document has been around for a long time, so I don't feel bad if you have forgotten it. And we are very much hoping to put it out of its misery shortly. The last time we actually presented this document was in Yokohama a whole year ago, because I then went AWOL for most of this year working on another project. And it was only due to Victor over there and kindly sort of, but repeatedly prompting me saying, we should work on the document. We really should work on the document, that we're here at all. So a little kudos to Victor for making it happen. Anyway, so we're going to talk about there. We modified the document scope a little bit, or clarified, I guess. That's actually clarified the document scope a little bit. We made a number of changes, and I'll go through this. And there are the changes in the IGP section. Just adding a bunch of detail. We tweaked the BGP section, and we did a complete rewrite of the addressing section because we got hell for that in Yokohama. So, okay, with that, next slide. Okay, so here's the one side. So what is this document for all of you who have forgotten? It describes routing-related design choices in V6 only or dual stack networks. And these are, if you will, sort of, they're sort of lower level than most of the higher level. Here is how you do V6 deployments that the working group has previously published. Though it has about, I don't know, 7, 8 of those over the past number of years. So this is a little bit lower level than that. And it assumes, so it's routing related only, first of all. It is not DNS. It is not DHCP. It is not end host, okay? It is routing related. And it assumes that the reader has a working knowledge of V4 network design. And so all they want to know is now, what is this V6 stuff? How do I do design in this brave new V6 world? Okay? This document, history then, this document is around a long time, was first published in June of 2012, was a working group document a few months later. It actually went through working group last call a year and a half ago and got lots of comments. We last were here discussing this in Yokohama a year ago, and I said then I went tired, but Victor finally prodded me. We got back to this. We had a -10, a -11, and as of now, today, a -12, trying to actually finish this document up. Okay, next slide. Okay, changes. So very early versions of this document actually just said it would talk about anything related to V6 design choices. That was obviously way too big. You could write a 100-page document or something like that with that type of scope. So we, Claire, cut that one down actually pretty soon. Shortly, in the introduction, it has said routing related for quite a while, but we kept on having people sort of overlook that portion. So this morning, the -12 version that publishes now says routing related in the title as well, okay? That was probably the biggest single change that went in the -12 version. Okay, next. Neutral tone. So when the document started, it was always doing one up there, okay? It was saying, here's a choice, here are your options, here's some facts about these options, here's some pros and cons. As we worked away on this document, a number of sections started slipping to be more number 2, okay, where they didn't present pros and cons, they just said, do it this way. One of the comments we got in Yokohama was that that was not good, and we agreed with them. So part of the rewrite that we did this fall was to go back through, clean up the document, and just do one everywhere. Basically, the idea is, Mr. and Mrs. Network Designer, here are your choices, here are your options, here are some facts that you want to know, maybe a bit of pros and cons. Now you make your own decision, okay, what way you want to go. Okay, next. Okay, so IGP section. So when this section was originally published, it focused mostly around a survey that Victor and I did about 2 years ago now of operators on what IGPs they actually ran in production networks. Okay, that was the primary focus of this. One of the feedbacks we got was it would be good to have a little bit more to back that up. So now in the new version has a lot more text about, okay, here are your choices, here are some pros and cons about your choices, and by the way, here are, as sort of supplemental information, here is what people actually run today in their network, okay? And another comment we got, somebody pointed out in the mailing list that we were missing one of the options. You can actually use OSPF v3 to route both v4 and v6. So that's now, there's a table in that section, and we now added that. We actually thought it was there, and we just pointed out we'd actually forgotten about it. Next. BGP section, not really very much changes there, just a little bit going through, cleaning things up, making little tweaks here and there. Next. Address section. So this is the big change. So if those people who actually remember the Yokohama discussion from a year ago, and you guys have probably forgotten about it, this is what everybody complained about, this section. And we got hell for this section. So we did a complete rewrite, okay? We removed all the IPv4 stuff from it. It talks now only about v6. It basically says, if you look at a v6 interface, it must have a link local address on it. It may have one or more other addresses, which we sort of generically loft there and call sort of multi-hop addresses. Okay, so which do you wish to go? There are 3 choices that you can, or 3 types that you can choose from. And where do you want to use them? Do you want to use them on your loopbacks? Do you want to use them on your links? Okay. And by the way, your choice probably depends on how you run your network. Are you one of those classic ISPs that carry your internet traffic hop by hop through the core? Or are you sort of more recent variety that carries everything inside a layer 3 VPN? That will determine a little bit which way you go. Next. Okay, actually, why don't we walk back for 2 seconds and just remind everybody, go out there, we'll just go remind everybody what I just said, because I went through it really quickly, and then I'll go that last slide. So yeah, we did, start right from there. So we did document scope, that's right there. Next, I should have put this slide in, I did this very last there. We did neutral tone throughout. We did this change to the IGP section, de-emphasizing the survey and adding a whole bunch of basic facts about it. We tweaked the BGP section, and we completely rewrote the addressing section because people really hated the previous version. And at this point in time, I should probably turn around and address the chairs. This is our thoughts about how we should proceed. We think it is done. We think it is ready to go. It would be good to get some comments. There was 2 reviewers who reviewed it last time. One of them was so kind to email me a second review just a few minutes ago. Tim right there saying he likes it now, but you can choose to do there. Okay, and at this point, I think I should shut up and take questions and then let you guys talk.
Mics are open. People are moving towards them. Remember to say your name. You'll remember.
Tim Chan. So yeah, I sent some comments to this. I guess the couple of relatively major ones. One is you've still got, you said it's no NAT in there, but you do have NPT v6 mentioned in the document.
We say it's out of scope.
Well, I would rather see nothing in there, or something preferably saying it's not recommended. But as it is, it's just a little teaser you've left in there.
It is something that people do. We just leave it as out of scope.
Okay, and the other one, I remember now, you say that PI is, you suggest it's kind of hard to get, but I think it's become not trivial, but next to trivial to get, certainly in the European region. I don't know whether it's the same worldwide, but it's a lot easier to get that, I think, than you suggest.
Okay, I've looked at the Aaron ones. I haven't looked at the RIPE the policy manual recently. That was a recent change?
Well, if you look at the policy on the right page, if you click, it's sort of been obsoleted about 6 times in the last 3 years, so it does change quite a lot. But the most recent one is certainly makes it fairly trivial.
Okay, so we will try to add a little bit more about how how easy or not it is to get PI space. Although ultimately, of course, there's the problem: if everybody gets PI space, then our writing tables are going to explode.
Jordi Palet, just to confirm about the PI, I worked on the PI policy changes in the 5 registered regions, and in all of them it's possible to get PI.
Yes, it's possible, and it's relatively easy. So the question is, can mom and pop florists get PI space?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so we are definitely going to blow our address tables out of the water. Okay. Glad you guys, I work for a vendor. Actually, both Victor and I now work for vendors. So all you operators, we are happy to have this be true, because you could simply buy lots more product from us. We're very happy. Go ahead.
Lorenzo Colletti, I think the section on addressing is almost perfect, because in the first sentence it says it doesn't talk about hosts. And when you're talking about addressing assigned routers, you can use Bogon space for all I care. Like, you can use whatever you want. You can use the root server IP addresses. That's my favorite. That's my favorite address range. That being said, I agree with Tim. I don't like seeing NPT66 there. It's not clear to me why you would use NPT66 if the only thing that you're talking about numbering is your routers. But so what I would suggest is that you would say ULA is not covered. So NPT66 is not covered here, and the drawbacks of ULA are as follows. And because we're only talking about routers here, it doesn't matter. Okay. Right? So, like I said, you can use my favorite address range for the routers is the global root server IP addresses. If you want to use ULA, you can use that. If you want to use my IP address, you can use that.
That's assuming you're not actually carrying internet traffic in your hop by hop in your base router or your GRT.
Well, you're going to respect BCP38, one assumes. So
yeah. Otherwise, but anyway, you'll have other
people
problems.
Will drop people will drop my address.
I mean, if you actually want to respond to pings and ICMP and traceroute and all that.
So if you were going to talk about hosts, then
but we're not.
Right. Yeah. But then you should absolutely. The PI problem is going to be solved by the drafts that, well, she's going to tell me. Yeah, go on, Dan.
No, I was just going to do some shameless plug and say, yeah, we have a draft which is Jedlinkova, and we have a draft which is actually talking about how we potentially can solve a problem of fusing provider aggregatable global address space for multi-homing and enterprises.
Okay.
Yeah, so I don't know, you probably might want to add a reference in the section when you're saying that PA address space has a disadvantage in multi-homing environment.
Yes, I mean, there's lots of stuff there. We didn't want to go into it, but I'm happy to add references. There's lots of references in this document. Wow.
I'm not seeing more people jumping up to the microphone. So, but I've heard fairly common minor, fairly minor comments. Can I ask how many people have? Oh, okay. Victor's got one more.
This is my co-author, by the way.
So just this is kind of like a personal
His
thing.
name is
So-
Victor
Oh,
Corson.
sorry, Victor Corson. There you go. Should have said name. On the PI thing, I mean, this is my personal opinion here, is I think in the draft we should still note that it's not trivial. There's, you know, if we suddenly, in the V4 world, which is what a lot of people had before they added V6, you could, you know, you just saying I'm going to get PI space, there's things that operator has to do. If you don't have an ASN, now you need to go get one. And you have to start to do routing that you may not have done before. So I think glossing it over and just suggesting that PA-PI is all going to be even is not a realistic setting that expectation is not realistic. I would say with my back to my previous operator hat on. There's more to do, and when you talk about
But
they
what
have
he's saying
networks,
is an
right?
operator, and I happen to agree with that. If you know, it's not, you have to have a relationship with whoever your RIR is, okay? And you have to go off and pay a yearly fee and all those things. So it's not zero, okay? It's, you know, mom and pop florists will find that onerous.
Tim Chan, so perhaps the distinction there is between multi-homing, which is what Jen's talking about, and renumbering when you change provider. There's perhaps different trade-offs if you.
Yes.
So I think just to have someone go for PI just to multi-home is not something they necessarily need to do, given what Jen's saying.
Yeah, I mean, just to comment on that a little bit from my own vantage point, Joel Yegley, area director. There's 55,000 entities in the world that have an ASN. There's a lot more small businesses in Korea, let alone say the United States, than that. So like, by and large, people already make this choice, and they make it in a particular way that says that they actually don't value having that relationship most of the time. Now, whether or not we're providing guidance to those people or to people who are a little bit higher up in the food chain, who might be participants in the global routing system, I tend to believe that we are providing guidance to people who are capable of making that decision or not, as opposed to the vast bulk of the population that has no interest in making that decision.
I'm going to suggest, well, I'm going to suggest first of all that it sounds like we have 1 or 2 sentences that we're discussing right now, and that if the 4 or 5 people who have comments on those 1 or 2 sentences would send suggested sentences to the list, we could probably move through that fairly quickly and agree on, and do the wordsmithing on the mailing list, which is a great place to do it because everybody can see the words we're talking about. Okay, good. Can I ask before we get on to path forward, and the mic is still open, we've got plenty of time. Can I ask how many people have read the 10, 11, or 12 version of this document? Raise your hand, please. All right, so that's a pretty good number. Okay, so, and I'm here, and actually more than half of those have actually commented the mic on the document and said it's pretty close. So my suggestion will be that we have those couple of minor tweak conversations on the list. If you guys can watch those, you know, figure out what the consensus looks like and spin another version in a couple of weeks, well, I think we probably are ready for working group last call. Unless somebody disagrees with that approach, I'm going to swing the gavel and say that's what we ought to do. Excellent. I love it when we move forward. Oh. The next item on our agenda was unique IPv6 prefix per host. I see John Brzezowski raising his hand, and good. So we have a speaker on this topic. That's good. Sorry about the mic. You can hold it like a rock star,
Oh, got it.
like you are.
Colleen, is Colleen here? Do you want to come up or no? So John Brzezowski, Colleen, also from Comcast, is a coworker of mine. We've done a lot of this work together, and it just so happens that she's here in Seoul. So I invited her. I took the liberty of inviting her up so that we can kind of jointly be here to walk through this very brief update. I sent the slides, but
Did you?
yeah, they're pretty brief. We'll kind of, well, at least trying to bring them up. We'll talk to you briefly about these. So is Gunther here? So one of the things that we are, there's Gunther. So one of the things that we are working on, Gunther and I have been a bit remiss in kind of processing some of the updates that we have with you guys. He and I are going to sit down tomorrow, probably with Colleen, and we're going to try to submit a new version of this thing so we can close this out. The main reason we've asked Lee and the chairs for updates here is we start to roll this out at Comcast. So we're about 65% of our Wi-Fi footprint has this rolled out. The other half, we think, we estimate will be out by, say, later this year or first quarter of 2017. So we're well on our way. We had a couple of things that we had to kind of work through. Nothing tragic as it relates to what we've written in the document, more kind of vendor bugs and that sort of stuff. There are some things that were typically fall outside the realm of IETF things that we had to deal with from an internal systems perspective, things like being able to respond to law enforcement agencies and that sort of stuff. But other than that, the only other comment that I think that we'd like to make is we're seeing a lower than normal expected adoption or usage of V6. We think that there's some investigation we have to go ahead and do there. It does not mirror what we're seeing on the broadband side, but it's not affecting our rollout at this stage of the game. So unless we really don't need the slides because that's basically what it all says. We'll take a few questions from you guys, see if there's anything that you're curious about. And then the only other piece to this, for those who've read the draft, is there's two parts to this work that we're doing in Comcast. One of them is your UE, your user equipment and its connectivity, which is basically everything that we've talked to you about here. And then the other part of this that you'll see that's also documented in the draft is the underlay technology, right? So the former we're going to call overlay. The underlay, in this case for us, we use GRE, and I think we're starting to look at L2TP, right? That's going to be part 2 of this project where we convert the underlay to be V6 only as well. I think that's less interesting to this crowd for the most part, but it's still something that we feel is germane to V6 Ops and the work that we generally talk about here. So with that, I'll pause for any questions, comments, curiosities. I think, Lee, the only other thing that we're looking at doing is if we can get this draft submitted, most of the feedback that we've gotten so far seems pretty editorial in nature. Mm-hmm. We'll pitch it to you and the rest of the working group to field any additional questions and then ultimately ask for some next steps, perhaps in the form of working group last call.
Mm-hmm.
Lorenzo Colletti, a couple of comments. You mentioned that less V6 traffic than expected. I wonder if you're using L equals 0, I think some version of Apple, it was reported that they don't reply to neighbor solicitations sent from a global address if L equals 0. And so you might be seeing their Happy Eyeballs algorithms do E4 instead. You could switch to using the link local address to do the neighbor solicitation, and that might work better. That's just an idea.
Can't say that we're not doing that though. Okay. So one of the things that we will look at is we were just talking about this at lunch. We have to dive in and take a look at logs and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. We don't think it's insurmountable. It just requires some time to dig in.
Other than that, I'm sure you're aware of it, but maybe for others too, there's a draft going forward in 6-man or going to be discussed in 6-man tomorrow. Is it tomorrow? Yeah, about because you provide a unique prefix per host, just adding a bit to the array that says this prefix is dedicated to you because it's already dedicated, and then the host can do lots of optimizations. And so if anyone's interested in that, come to 6-man or read the draft.
So one comment on that one. Part of the reason why we even wrote this to be shared here in V6 Ops is because we got some feedback from other people in the community say, hey, this looks like it's interesting and useful. Since then, we've also started looking at it and using it in other contexts beyond Wi-Fi, right? So what Colleen and I do together is really kind of mainly Wi-Fi related, but we're looking at it in many other contexts, the data center and what have you. I know there's some Facebook folks here that I've had the conversations with, or at least kind of indirectly. So that's, FYI, full disclosure. So we haven't read it yet. So, but I will, and I'll be prepared to kind of, provide some comments. But we like the direction it's going in as well.
Thanks.
David Lampeter, just as feedback, I do have a hacked up implementation of this, and I'm hoping to deploy it at another conference at the end of this year. So.
That's great. All right, thank you.
Great. That sounds. I agree with what you described, but it sounds like it's pretty mature, and we'll give it a little longer for feedback, and then do a working group last call, unless anybody further has comments on that, because this also has seemed like it's had fairly strong consensus over its life. Okay. Excellent. Our next agenda topic was enterprise multi-homing. I did not get your slides.
I sent them yesterday and just sent them to you again. I sent them yesterday to chair, and I sent them to you like 10 minutes ago, half an hour ago.
The mail from Jen.
Not there.
Or spam filter going to be becoming too effective.
That's possible. It's not the junk folder.
All right, so it's actually, hopefully will be quick. So just an update on 0.1 version of the draft. Next slide, please. Yeah, just a refresh. It's slide. It's. Oh. Okay, I'm joining over Google. This.
Okay.
Okay.
Stay in the pink box.
Okay.
You don't have to. It's just much nicer for the remote participants to be able to see you when you're talking.
Thank you. Okay, so just for those who did not attend this meeting last time, just a slide from presentation we made on IETF 96. So the problem statement, we'd like to solve problem which has already been mentioned today about how can we do multi-homing an enterprise network using provider address space, without getting your own address space or running BGP with your ISP, because in many cases it's just not the good choice. And there are two parts of the problem. First, how can you send packet with particular source address to the right ISP? And this is routing part of the draft, which talks about source address dependent routing. And then how can you make host to choose the right address, whatever right means in a particular case, so this packet could be delivered. Again, we're assuming there are providers out there who do implement BCP38. And indeed, we do not want to talk about NAT at all. And apparently, there is no proper way you can do it currently without various nasty hacks. So, and it looks like people out there are actually already starting doing some NAT-PT and so on, because there is no other proper solution for this problem. So there is a link to the slides from the last IETF, where are some nice pictures illustrating what I'm talking about. So if you do not want to read the draft, you can just look at the slides. And next slide, please. So not many changes been done. So we clarified some sections about default address selection, because basically the whole trick we are proposing is relying on mostly on the rule 5.5 of default address selection algorithm. And then we added a section to discuss the problem of selecting DNS, because selecting the right address, it's just a part of the problem. Yeah, and we can do some interesting things using default address selection and slug, as described in the draft. But apparently, host also might need to properly select other configuration parameters like DNS and search list. And it is actually maybe even more interesting than selecting source address, and I'll talk about it in a second. And yeah, and some references have been added to the document. So next slide, please. Yeah, and I think Lorenzo suggested last time that probably, because the current version of the draft relies on Rule 5.5, which is not supported by all operating systems out there. So and we tried in the draft to cover as many possible use cases, not just two ISPs when you can use either both of them or one of them as a primary uplink and secondary as a backup, but also various tricky use cases when there are walled gardens and one of the ISP might provide some special services and so on. However, it looks like one of the few most common use cases could be easily addressed without even relying on Rule 5.5, and it could be done even today with some help from router vendors. So I'm still going, definitely before next IETF, to fork a separate draft from this one to cover most common use cases, not solving all problems, it's not a silver bullet, but just to describe most useful scenario. And next slide, please. Yeah, so just to describe what's going on. So this draft actually has two big sections. One is mostly talking about routing part, about using source address dependent routing. So how routers are going to forward packets based on the source address by creating scoped forwarding tables. And second, section 4 actually of the draft is mostly talking about a source address selection on a host and how hosts could interact with the first hop routers. So first hop routers could influence source address selection on a host based on the current routing state of the network. So we actually thinking about calling for adoption for the current draft in routing working group. And indeed, we need feedback from V6OPS on, especially on the section 4 of the draft. And the second draft, which I'm going to fork from it, I will present at V6OPS, because it's not going to talk about routing part. It will mostly host default address selection and interaction with first hop router. So stay tuned for the next IETF. And next slide, please. Actually, next slide. So the tricky part. So obviously, if you have more than one ISP, it's quite possible, unless ISP and lazy and just send you Google DNS as a DNS server. Each ISP might provide its own set of DNS servers IP and even search lists. Just sending that information to host is relatively easy, right? Because the whole draft is basically talking about how can we use Slack to configure host and influence address selection of the host. So we can use RDNSS to do this. And it's actually possible to also deprecate the DNS information from one of the ISP if connectivity to that ISP is lost. So failure scenario is reasonably straightforward. Next slide. Something like this. So as discussed in the draft, if scoped forwarding table for one red ISP, let's call it red ISP, doesn't have any routes, we don't have connectivity to that ISP, so we're not just deprecating addresses from ISP B block, we also can deprecate DNS information provided by that ISP if needed. Next slide, please. However, I see at least two problematic scenarios. So if host has two set of DNS servers, it will probably pick up just one of those DNS servers at random, and there is no way you can currently influence the source selection for DNS server, right? So it's quite possible that packet to red ISP DNS will be sent from blue address space. And next slide, please. Yeah, and it could go through blue ISP uplink to the internet and might even actually reach the DNS server, but we do not know if the host will get required answer, because the DNS server might be not reachable or might not answer or might give different answer depending on the source address. So basically DNS split horizon. So it's basically not desired scenario. And next slide, please. And another problematic scenario is, again, if there are some local namespaces and you basically could not resolve some namespaces if you ask DNS server of one ISP about particular namespace, which only could be resolved through second ISP. And indeed, host will just get an X domain from name server and would not even try to ask the next one. Next slide, please. Yeah, basically some scenarios, a host is picking up the first DNS server in the list, ask DNS server for some special name from ISPB namespace, get an X domain, and it will result in communication failure. Next slide, please. So ideally, in ideal world, it would be nice if host could somehow knows which DNS server to ask for which name, but I don't think it's actually possible now in the generic scenario. So what I'm thinking about is probably we just need to kind of say, okay, we could not solve all possible insane scenarios you might see in the real life. So probably a recommendation should be, if you do have such complex scenario in your network, it probably makes sense to run your DNS server within the network and let DNS server to solve all those problems and just provide the local DNS server, which is located within the network, to hosts. And do not try to make hosts to make all those complex decisions. I probably need to update the text of the draft. It will be in the version 02. And I think next slide is actually questions, comments, suggestions.
So Philip Matthews, Nokia. I'm wondering, what about the case where the ISPs, the two DNS servers in the ISPs will answer differently to the same query? There's a number of cases there, and so if you ask one and you get an answer, you have to send the packet that way to the ISP, and if you actually ask the other one, you need to send the packet that way instead. And I'm not sure if even running a recursive name server inside is going to solve that problem.
You're talking about like cases like DNS-based geolocation, when I might be redirected to different, user might be redirected to different, like CDN, for example.
That's
yeah, obviously,
one
yeah.
possibility. I was also thinking, back in the days, like if people get to the point where they actually start running NAT 6.4, for example, and DNS 6.4, then again, you get a whole bunch of different stuff. And I can see ISPs getting to there at some point.
It is funny. I actually think you will have the same problem in V4, right? You potentially can, even if you use NAT, right? You send a packet to DNS or blue DNS. Okay, let me use my terminology. I send packet to blue DNS, get an answer, but actual data packet to a server going through red ISP. Because either the company is doing load balancing or it's just our routing policy, yeah? So I don't think this problem could be completely solved, or at least I have no ideas how to prevent all possible, like all these corner cases.
Sometimes people put, I think, a little bit of DNS knowledge into their NAT to make some of this stuff work. So or there. So I'm just mentioning, I think this is a case which maybe isn't
it's
handled
worth
yet.
mentioning, because thank you, yeah, appreciate it.
Renzo Khalidi. So I think the MIF working group discussed this problem at length when it was forming. And a long time ago, I think even in the RFC, the MIF architecture RFC, we wrote down that the only way to solve these problems is to have each bit of configuration information that when it's communicated to the host have an ID on it. And That would solve, I think, both of problems 1 and 2, because it ties the data. Because problem 1 is tying the source address to the I forget, but I think they're basically, well, this one is solved by basically saying yes. If you put the DNS A into PVD1, and then you know that you use the source address from PVD1, and as long as the network knows how to route based on PVDs, which you can do usually via source test most of the time, then it works. And so I think it would solve both the problems. And I think somebody's writing a draft somewhere in 6man maybe to actually provide ways of doing this. The MIF working group was shut down, but there's still interest in doing this work. And I think we can expect that this eventually will become part of operating systems, right? Because operating systems already have to do this on a per network basis, right? That was solved years ago. And so it's a matter of communicating the bits of information correctly.
David Lampeter. Two separate comments. For DNS, I think actually what this is coming down to is that it's ultimately a policy decision, and the easy way out that I see here is to just say, well, you should really be running a recursive resolver and actually put your policy on that recursive resolver, because if you really get different replies for the same name from your ISPs, then you want to decide for your entire network and manage that, and that's going to be on that recursive resolver. So I'm not even sure I would discuss other options, because I agree that it's kind of very complicated and complex and maybe even unsolvable. So I would just stick with that recommendation and be done with it. I don't know.
What we're trying to do, because I personally seen scenarios when you have a small network. It's part of enterprise network, but it's small location somewhere, and I have 10 people sitting, right? And having resolver right there, it's not always a good option. But again, I think it depends on the scenario. If it's just 2 ISPs just for internet access, we don't need resolver. We just use RDNSS and everything works. If you have something more complex, then most likely, it's what we're going to put in the draft. If it's something more complex than just 2 internet uplinks, resolver will be best option currently until our bright future, which has not been evenly distributed yet, finally comes.
Right. So it's basically, it can be made to work like this for easy cases, but not really for complicated ones. I have a different question though. Can you go back to the slide with the draft split up? The beginning way earlier. This one. I don't understand why the split is where it is, to be honest. Why is the source address stuff split apart in the middle, and we still have source address selection in the routing area draft? I'm not sure.
The current draft is kind of generic, right? We're not trying to solve just problem of 2 uplinks. We're trying to talk about various scenarios like walled garden and so on. And so far, it does not look like we have an easy way to solve that problem without relying on Rule 5.5 and all those things related to DNS. But we probably still would like to have some discussion on this topic and have some solution, providing you can use Rule 5.5. So this is the current draft, right? And because it's half of it is about routing, we're thinking about getting it adopted in routing working group. But draft Lorenzo suggested last time is just covering one particular but most common use case, has nothing to do with routing. So it will come to V6OPS.
Okay.
Is it?
Yeah, I think I understood.
Have I answered your question?
I think,
Okay.
So I'm going to agree with that. So you're looking for feedback. You've had a little bit. That sounds like it's useful. We're not looking to adopt this document. It's informational for this working group, because this one is we're looking for a running working group. But we hope to see you again later with a new draft.
Yeah, actually, we're looking for feedback. I know it's kind of a big request to ask people to read 45 pages draft, but you can go to section 4 if you want and start from there, as I said last time. So I posted it to the mailing list at the beginning of November. So please, feedback is highly appreciated.
Hang on just a minute so I can copy your file and then give you back your USB key. It's literally your keys, too. Yeah. I'm willing to accept that there's something wrong with my mailbox. And eject the key. Come on. There we go. Okay. Excellent. Thank you for that. So our next agenda item involves some Miracle magic. We're going to try and get Tori Anderson. Tori, you online? Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Excellent. We can hear you, and it's fantastic.
Perfect. Can you see me as well?
Give us just a minute. Whoops. Oh, you see him over there. There you go. You made it happen. I was going to try and bring up the slides, but now that I've just messed with Jen's slides, I'm in the wrong folder. Fantastic. We can see your slides. We can see you. We can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, perfect. So good morning, or good afternoon, as I guess it is where you are. I see there must have been some sort of scheduling error because from my calculations, I think I have over an hour to talk about the prefix. And I think you'll be happy to hear that you'll get an early coffee break because I only have 2 slides. So you can just move on to the first one of those, which is basically an update on what I did since the last IETF meeting. The controversy during the last meeting was the prefix itself, the /16, that it was just too large. So I think we agreed that it got reduced to a /48, which has the added side benefit that it does not encompass the prefix from RFC 6052, which kind of makes things much easier, since now this is completely distinct and does not really relate to the 6052 prefix at all. And while there was some further discussion on the list about the prefix, whether it should be a /32 or if it should be somewhere else in the address space, I think that I got the feeling from the list that 64 FF9B1 /48 is okay, and that's basically what I'm going to aim for. I don't think that we should make more adjustments there. Other than that, added a section about checksum neutrality per request and fixed up the IANA considerations section so that has the proper format. Other than that, I got some various feedback on how to meet out the text here, add some references, some editorial stuff. I was intending to update the draft, but the day job got in the way, so I didn't make the submission deadline. So, yeah, that's just a matter of getting that done. Last slide, please. So basically, at this point, I think the draft is, as far as what the draft really does to reserve the prefix, it is basically done. I mean, we can polish it here and there, add some references, probably fix up some text, but I think at this point we really need to decide if this is something that we should do or not. If we should proceed with this, then I think it should be a rather quick journey through the working group and last call and so on. Because I mean, if we agree that reserving a /48 prefix for translation is okay, then that's basically everything this draft does. So it should be non-controversial, and the rest is just polish. Or if not, then of course, then I'll just stop using my time on it. So that's it. That's my presentation. And now you can go have coffee or ask your questions for over an hour.
That was less than an hour. That was impressive. So we had a lot of conversation at the last meeting about this document, and it was not clear to me then whether we should allocate a prefix or if the conversation leaned more against what size prefix. So one of those questions has been Tori's responded to it. We need to know, is this something that we think ought to do, and are we there?
Lorenzo Colletti, I think I'm not opposed to either way, but I think if we reserve a 48 for NSPs, we should provide some guidance as to when you would use your own address space and when you would use a SIG4 FF9B something, right? Because previously you could use NSPs, right? You just allocate them. And so I think maybe it was in a previous version of ROFT. I just skimmed it again and I didn't see it. But we should provide guidance as to when do you use this and when do you not. Because people might assume that that's what you have to do, but it does, it's not necessarily the best option. And one thing that you say in your draft is implementations must not assume anything about these addresses. Well, we know how that's going to go, right? So we should think about what guidance we want to give, at least to point into the right direction, and then that's all we can do, right? But we should think about that.
Yeah. I'm not sure if I actually put that into the draft in very clear terms, but the idea is that you to have a prefix that's very distinct from your own address space, so that it does not, share the properties of your own address space with regards to, having full access to your mail servers for relaying or your DNS servers for resolving and so on, so that the addresses that basically represent the IPv4 internet does not masquerade as a subset of your own address space. And I'll put that into the next draft if it's not already there. Thank you.
Those concerns would be mostly interesting if they were used as source addresses, right? But they're never used as source addresses, right? These addresses. Oh no, sorry. Yeah, when you get replies. So, but the NAT64 is stateful, so it keeps state. But yeah,
This is not just NAT64. This is RFC 6052. So you can use it for any translation technology you want. And that's why I say that you should not assume anything about these addresses, because, for instance, if you assume, this is NAT64, RFC 6146, that's the only thing they're going to be used for, that assumption might be wrong. And if you make such an assumption about the RFC 6052 prefix, that assumption might be wrong as well. And the same thing, you cannot know if even if you're using NAT64 and 6052 algorithm with it, you can still not know if it's a /64 or if it's a /96. And if so, you cannot know where in the address space the IPv4 address is. So basically, it's the same as with a global unicast address, right? You cannot know if that's an IPv4 embedded address, and if so, where the IPv4 address is.
Yeah, it would just be good to have a section on this.
Yeah, sure.
A little surprised, based on the conversation we had at the last meeting, not to see more people running to the microphone. This was an interesting topic. Even if somebody just wants to say, yes, this solves my concerns that I raised at the last meeting, that would be useful.
David Skenazy, Apple. As one of the people who had concerns last time, the new prefix and draft address my concerns. Thanks for doing that.
Thank you.
Dave Thaler, the section on checks on neutrality addresses my concerns. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so I was going to ask if this is, bless you, I was going to ask you if this was a problem space that we need to address, but I think that we're sort of arriving there. Go ahead.
Hi, Tor, this is Tariq Siraj. I haven't read the RFC or the draft so far, but I know about the NAT64 and DNS64 and the 96 bits prefix. So can I ask that I have discussion with Tor on emails about this issue earlier 2 years ago when we were doing the IPv4, IPv6 hybrid network deployment projects. Actually, my question is that increasing the host ID portion, can we solve the multicast issues in translation?
I don't really know how to answer that. The RFC, if this is being used in RFC 6052 context, then it's basically a matter of embedding an IPv4 address in an IPv6 address or vice versa. So if that's a multicast address or a unspecified address or whatever, it's just putting bits in a larger sequence of bits or extracting bits from a larger sequence of bits. But operationally, if you can use this to make multicast work, there's no provisions for that or any feature that would kind of make IPv4 to IPv6 translation of multicast traffic work. So I guess it depends on the technology. If you have a technology that allows that to happen and it needs a translation prefix, then I'm sure that you can use this prefix as any other prefix for that solution. But that's not really a goal of this draft to make multicast work, so to speak. I hope that was a bad answer, but I think it's the best one I have. So sorry about that.
But before you sit down, let me ask you: do you think it solves the problem? And either way, do you think we need a section in this document describing it, or do you think we need a separate document if we adopt this, saying here's another application?
Actually, I am more practical than believing in drafts and RFCs. Actually, unless I see it and I implement it, and if it works for me, only then I can answer to your question. Currently, if 96 cannot, if we were using 96 bits and we just need 32 bits for the IPv4 address to be translated in the IPv6 address space, I don't understand that if we increase the host ID portion and compressing the prefix network prefix to 48 bit, so can it still solve all those issues that we were facing in NAT64? If it cannot, because only we are not only using unicast traffic and the network is not specific to unicast traffic. Basically, IPv6 has so many multicast traffic, so the translation should be focusing the multicast traffic as well. In NAT64, when the 64:FFF9B://96 prefix were using, it was not supporting the multicast issue. So that I question this in that perspective. Actually, it's 2 years back. I hope Tor remember my emails, because we haven't exchanged email after that project when we concluded. So hopefully, unless I implement it, to your question, I cannot comment on that.
I would say thank you. I would say I hope that you will, and come back, and either way, let us know how it works. I think that would be really useful to this working group.
Right.
Yeah. And I'd just like to add that this prefix does not mandate that you use it with NAT64 or any other particular technology. So if you sit at home and you cook up some technology that solves your problem, and you need a certain number of bits length prefix to make that happen, then if the 80 bit of host ID or host plus whatever you want to put in them is enough, then you can use this prefix. If it /48 is not long enough, then or short enough, then you can't. So that's basically it.
Philip Matthews. So I just scanned this draft, and it's been a few years
with all the stuff with well-known prefix, so my memory is a little bit poor in all this. You're pulling a /48 with a :1 there, and the well-known prefix has a :0 but is only a 96. What's happening with the rest of the :0/48? I guess is the whole idea is we're not saying anything about what that's being used for. I've just, because you do suggest that you could summarize everything up with a /47, but the question is, what about this hole that's sort of sitting in there? And I can't remember if there was something about that way back when the well-known prefix stuff was there. As I said, my memory of that is faded now over the years. So anyway, that's my question.
That space is unallocated or reserved by the IETF, or as in it will remain in the registration state it is currently. It's not being touched. So that's it.
Presumably, then this document should probably say at least don't allocate it for something totally unrelated, because otherwise the using the /47 doesn't make sense. It should be something related so that the /47 makes sense.
Yeah, or I can just not suggest that people used /47 to refer to the space, because this prefix and the RFC 6052 prefix are, sorry, screensaver. There you go. They are distinct. They are not overlapping, not really related to each other, even though they might be used for very similar purposes or even the same exact purpose. They are not related to each other, really.
Eric Klein. I'm neither in favor nor opposed to this per se. I think the way that I feel about it is it seems to me to be semantically identical to allocating a ULA that happens to just neighbor the 6052 space.
No, because
it's not clear to me why it needs to be a well-known prefix, right?
You cannot, or you
to do this, and this is just saying, well, we're just going to pick a ULA to do it, not from the ULA space, of course, but it just happens to be neighboring so that it can be covered with a /47.
Yes, absolutely. So it is basically a prefix for that purpose. So and I'm glad you clarified that you did not specify the actual ULA space, because that it has special treatment in host in address selection, so it can't be used for this in a proper manner.
To the address selection point, is there a special handling of the 6052 prefix in address selection? Or is it bucketed under 0? It's under 0/3, right?
I believe so, yeah.
Thanks.
Well, thank you. And I feel better that more people were involved and showing interest and have at least read the document and understand what's going on. So I think it is time to respond and say, and ask whether this is something we're going to do. So we're going to take a hum. I'm going to ask if you think we should adopt this document. I'm going to ask if you think we should not adopt this document. And if I hear very little humming in both directions, I might ask whether you are indifferent. But I'm going to, because that would also matter to me. So, but I'm going to start with, if you think we should adopt this document as a working group document, please hum. Thank you. If you think we should not adopt this document as a working group document, please hum. Okay, I think that's enough. Did you have one more question, comment? No? Okay. Good. Then Tori, you were gonna do another revision anyway. You can name that V6OPS. And
so the hum was a successful one, so to speak, or that was adopt. I couldn't hear from here.
We have adopted. Yes, I am sorry, I forgot to gavel. We have adopted this document as a working group document. So when you spin your next revision, you can name it draft IETF V6OPS.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
And that was, so now we are up to our additional bonus agenda item. Victor had asked for 5 or 10 minutes. Victor, you had asked for 5 or 10 minutes. This is your hour.
One slide. So this was related to comments we got on the design draft. There was a point there I thought was important. I thought it was important to bring out, which was there was suggestions about, V6, we were talking about V4 versus V6 design, and V6 is great, and we can do a lot of really cool things with V6, and it can make operations better, et cetera. What I thought, I thought it wasn't appropriate necessarily to try to inline in a bunch of other documents that might have other intended purposes to try to fit in all the greatness of V6 versus what if we then had a series of documents, if people are willing to write them, that went and talked about the specific use case and extrapolated a bunch of information that was relevant to how things are different with V6, how it's used there, and you kind of take it top to bottom, showing the operational components of it. Is it savings? Is it beneficial? Is there more things you can do with it? That, we should try to capture these in separate documents as opposed to hiding things in line in other documents, like I mentioned earlier, that had intended purposes that may not have been specific or specifically for that. Anyway, that's the point. I just wanted to kind of highlight and bring out, what does the working group feel about this? Does that make more sense? Or do we continue to try to stuff information into a whole bunch of other documents? No one's interested in this, apparently. So anyway, that was the intended purpose, and that's what I thought I'd just bring up and figure out how people feel about that.
The opinion train is coming. Michael Abraham says, so I think that would be very useful. I run into this all the time with people who are used to IPv4 and they're trying to do the same thing in IPv6 because they don't really know that you can do things differently in IPv6 that might actually be easier and help them. So I think that would be extremely useful.
Eric Klein. I frequently find myself having to explain to people that IPv6 is not 128-bit IPv4 and describe some of the ways in which it's not. A lot of that involves pointing at 7934 and a list of other documents, like the NV03/64 to the host and the data center stuff, ILA, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know that it could be captured in a single document without looking super religious or, extra fervent or whatever. But trying might be fun.
I have a comment, but I'll let Lynn. No, you go first.
Janikova, I love this idea, and it's actually, I like the timing because we just had last week discussion on Eastern European Operators Working Group mailing list about, yes, we probably to help promote NV6 and explain to people how to deploy it, we probably need to document our things which you can do better or differently in V6 comparing to V4. Yeah, so great idea.
And so as you guys walk up, and the thought was, I'm not sure if one document is the way to go. Maybe it's per use case or you break down. I have no intended thought as to how we capture it, but I thought it was important that we do. And it's, as opposed to sticking it in line, is make it specific. Here's how top to bottom, why it's better and how we would do it, operationalize it, et cetera. Sorry.
Dan York, absolutely. I mean, this, that I've been involved in IPv6 advocacy kind of work, and this is the kind of thing that is needed. And the more specific you can get and the more you can define what you found in this case or why, anything you can do in that regard is good. So yes, I would say any of these docs are good.
Lorenzo Caridi, yeah, I think that's what you said, Jen, is right. It's time. The reason, so when I saw this, I said, well, wait, that's stupid. Why didn't we have this already? And then I said, oh, that's why. So we couldn't have this because it would risk. Because it would have fallen on deaf ears before, right? If we'd written this 5 years ago, it would have been just more fanfaring and zealotry. But now that V6 is real, that people are actually deploying it for different reasons. Now is the time to tell them, look, here's this V6 that you're doing for other reasons. Here's what you can do with it. And as you look at deploying it in various parts of your network in different ways, think about how these things that you maybe don't want to do today, but you might want to do in 2 years, how they would fit into how you design things. Like one idea is like the 64 per host with like an IP address per app, right? That's that's an obvious example, right? But there may be more. I don't know about how you put them in one document versus multiple documents, but I do think it's a good time to start writing this stuff.
I was just going to second, Dan York, second Lorenzo's point too, about the timing wise. The other advantage is that we now have very solid measurements, et cetera, you know, that show when you start looking at the measurements out of the World IPv6 launch stuff that shows that, you know, Verizon's network at the high percentage it is, the other networks that are there, you know, it's very clear that you know, that IPv6 is being deployed. So we're starting to see that, that happening there.
Jordi Palet, I submitted a document in 2006 to this working group, trying to explain how to deploy, how to do the point-to-point links. I think at that time the working group basically said you should not tell so much in deep to the ISPs how to do the things. Actually, I didn't reach the deadline for submitting a new version, but I think that's somehow related to this, and I probably will submit a new version today or tomorrow. I think it's related to all this, actually. It's going into the details about how to do the things, right?
Tom Herbert. So it sounds like a great idea. One question I would have, though, is the intent of this to kind of document experience with IPv6 and say, and thinking of something like extension headers. So we know extension headers have problems in the internet. How would we phrase that in terms of utilizing IPv6 capabilities? Would we advocate that, or kind of say, well, you can, but mileage may vary? How would you phrase that?
You might well say, you know, your luck may vary. You can use it in the following circumstances. You know, if you can describe, this is, you know, I'm just sort of, sorry, I'm responding for you. I think that's a great option. Although I have a further question that I was about to ask the working group, which is, are we talking about writing documents that describe clever things that people have done with IPv6 because it's IPv6 and they couldn't do it before, or are we talking about clever things that people could do with IPv6?
So just before you come up, again, I was still thinking through this. I think maybe both might be relevant. In like, if you go back 5-10 years, it was a lot of theory that we would have put towards this, right? We thought we knew what we were going to get into, but we've experienced a lot of V6 over the last number of years. So I think what's going to happen now is we can talk about practical things that we've actually done. You know, case in point, what Gunter and you know, Brzezowski talked about, and Comcast, et cetera. But now if we extrapolate, we have more experience by which to then base maybe some additional theory on, right? Like, I mean, we have more behind us to then figure out what could also be the art of the possible. So I think times have changed, in my opinion.
Yeah, Eric Klein. I think actually we could probably document stuff that people have attempted to one degree or another actually at this point, because like Jeff Houston documented last month or so, I think, how he was doing /64 to a host and serving all manner of IP addresses from that. We have done that in data centers for not quite a decade now, but just about. I think the core thing for me is trying to figure out, well, when I explain to people, like, it's not 128-bit IPv4, it's all about, like, you have 18 million trillion addresses in a /64, right? And that kind of abundance is like way outside of our ordinary scope of thinking. So to convey the idea that you have this abundance and you don't need to be as parsimonious as you were in before, I would approve. If somebody could, yeah, I would support anyone who can craft such statement well.
Dan York, I would focus on what have we learned? What are the real things that are out there? We have endless documents that talk about all the things that could happen and would happen if everybody did IPv6. Yahoo, let's talk about what people have actually seen. What have they learned? You know, to Eric's point about the abundance issue around that, you know, do we have any instances that people can show where they went IPv6 only on the inside and you know, were able to take the people who were, you know, previously spent doing all the subnet allocation stuff that they had to go and figure out to go and make it all work across an enterprise WAN, were they able to retask those people on other things because they were able to make their internal networks more efficient? Let's look at how we can document the things that we can, you know, are observed and we've seen that because now we have real deployments, because that's what we need is real facts, real things, real stuff that people can talk about.
Jelinkova, +1, what Dan said, we need to probably document what have been done to prove that it's possible and it's beneficial, because there are countries out there when the adoption rate is like below 1%. And when you go there and talk to those people and ask them why, you get two answers. I don't know how, and I don't know why. And we can help them giving them that answer.
Lorenzo, I think these two things are really just at what scale does it need to have to be? Does it have to need to have been done before you can talk about it, right? If I build some code and run it on my 56 at home, and I can whatever, there's some stuff that I can do. I mean, one idea that I'd have, and which may be a dumb idea, and I don't know until somebody works out the math, but like right now we have SNI, right? And SNI is in the clear and everyone can see it. But if we went back then, it's like, why do we do SNI? Well, because we don't have enough IP addresses, right? But we do now, right? So you could say, well, that's one thing that you could do, and you could say, well, here's how you'd use one IPv6 address per host, and so you don't have to leak anything inside DNS. Inside the SNI handshake. So I don't know, that seems useful to document, even if no one's actually been doing it. Another reason, if you insist on documenting stuff that people have done, then they're going to have to want to. Then they're going to have to say, well, this is who I am, and here's what I did, and then maybe that's going to involve people going to lawyers and things like that.
So putting myself back in line, yeah. I mean, I'm not personally. I don't think one excludes the other. So I think documenting what we've done is important. I also think documenting what we can do, personally, I think is important, because there's a lot of, as I've heard this in the list, right? People say, well, you're thinking the old way. You're thinking in a constrained environment. The answer is, well, no. Let's open up people's minds to what you could potentially do, although we may not have done it or not done it at scale. I remember having conversations with, I won't name where, but folks in the past, and we suggested models, and they're like, that's crazy talk. Who would do this? But I think now we have enough deployments behind us where we can actually have open conversations about the art of the possible, based on experience. So that's it.
Okay, so as working group chair, knowing this was coming, I did reread the charter to make sure that I knew what it said. And it says that we're here to document operational experiences and issues with IPv6. And I don't think we're necessarily describing issues here. So I may have to go back to my co-chairs and area director and say that I think there's interest in discussing this. I think it may require a recharter. It's a fairly minor recharter.
Yeah, I think this is totally doable.
Yeah. So yeah, obviously we'll come back and ask you. We'll try and draft a charter and ask if you like it. But I'm hearing pretty strong support. As a chair, my inclination is to push back a little bit harder on things that haven't actually been done. If you've got code, even if it's working in a lab, yes, that's more interesting than a clever idea you had once in the shower. If you've actually deployed something in a network, that's even more interesting, and I would like to hear that. So that's the way I would lean, but I don't own the working group. I just facilitate its operation. So willing to take feedback on that either now or another time, and in direction from my AD, of course.
Yeah. So I'm a little bemused by the cases where we don't seem to have experience with it, because, for example, like the prefix edition thing, I've been binding prefixes to loopbacks on hosts for like Eric for about a decade, and we definitely have a lot of experience with that sort of thing. So I think we should be able to tease out the ones that we're quite comfortable with, I think, pretty easily. Yeah. And if no one does it, then, well, I guess we're sort of speculating about things.
And I could imagine
fall into that case.
And I could absolutely imagine saying somebody having a clever idea, they want to say, hey, has anybody thought about doing this, and giving them some agenda time if there's interest on the list. But that doesn't. I probably would resist publishing that as a working group document if it's never been.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the things in this space seem to be driven by business requirements. So if nobody's done it, then that's a pretty significant argument for not doing anything about it right now.
I was going to say that, Eric Flanagan, that I can point you to the blog post for Google Cloud SQL where they give one IPv6 address per customer for free. And if you want IPv4, you have to pay for it.
Janikova, one comment. I just realized that probably we do not have the right people in the room because there is a community out there, mostly BCOP community and a network operation group, like one a tribe and another region, and it's probably right people we should reach to hear what they're doing. And the comment about if people has not done it yet, probably it's not needed. Sometimes people do not do it because they do not know about that, or they do not have required functionality yet.
So I'm very friendly to your suggestion that operators should give input to the V6 operations working group. Very, very friendly to that one. And I agree that there's definitely room within the IETF to discuss things that haven't been done before. That's a great place. I'm not sure V6 Ops is the place to publish documents for fresh, brand new ideas, but I'm willing to discuss that as we talk about our charter.
Mike Ackerman, I was going to ask, who's the intended recipient of this document? And I hope it's me, the enterprise that seems incapable, Mike Ackerman, of deploying IPv6, and we're not alone. So it is, we do need all the help we can get. And I was just going to add one bit of advice to try to keep it somewhat business oriented. I like all the technical stuff, but you're going to blow us away. And it won't achieve the desired result, I don't think. So.
I don't know. I think that
who are we after here?
There may be multiple things. I think that what I heard from Victor is that there's interest in saying, here are some cool new things that you can do with IPv6 that you couldn't do in IPv4, which probably would be targeted at people who are thinking about deploying IPv6 and trying to develop more reasons to support that. But I don't want to speak for Victor.
And
I've got to follow
on to what you just said, Lee. One of the problems is we're not thinking about it.
Yep.
We should be. And I think here's an opportunity to get us thinking about it.
If we can solve problems that you have, that would be great, yes.
So, I mean, there's more than one way to look at this. However, one of the things I was thinking about is probably, I mean, we are a technology organization, so I think the technology has to show up somehow in the writing. Probably a roll-up of that, whether that's done here or elsewhere.
And I didn't mean leave that out, because that's the most valuable piece of it. I'm just saying.
I agree.
I'll love it. My boss won't understand it, so we won't do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think expand and simplify. So we have the details, we have the information, and we simplify it, and it gets simplified. Don't know who would do this and how we do this, but I agree, because you want to take it up to business speak at some point. So some executive says, yeah, that's worth money. I see why we'd do this. I mean, that'd be beneficial at some point.
Well, then in advance, thank you.
If we publish technical documents and we need management translation, then I would ask Dan York to help us out, because that seems like a thing that he's really good at. That brings us to the end of our modified agenda. Does anybody have anything else they'd like to talk about related to V6 operations? Hearing none, we are adjourned. Thank you very much. I'm looking for the blue sheets back. I see at least one. Both of them there. Thank you.
Yep.
Ron.
Thanks. Thank you. Yep. One. Feels like old times. The band back together.
It's just band back together.
Like